How many of you want your family to be blessed? Anybody? Yep. Yeah. I mean, what would be the opposite, right? Want my family to be cursed? Nobody wants that. It doesn't matter where you're at in the spiritual spectrum or where you're at in your journey with Jesus. You're like, yeah, I want my family to live in blessings. And I know we're all at different places in our family life. Some of you are single and maybe never been married. Some of you are single after marriage. Some of you are married right now. You're having kids. Or maybe you're like me. I'm a grandparent. Wherever you're at, whoever we know and love as our family, we want them to be blessed. So that's why we're doing this series. What does God say about that? When we talk about being a fixer-upper, we kind of realize we're all broken. Are you okay with that? Because I think I was the only one that raised my hand that had family dynamic problems when Kyle asked. And I'm like, whoa, this is just for me. Yeah, so how do we get in line with God's word? What does he say? What do you think of when you think about fixer-upper? I looked just on Tucson right now and what the fixer-uppers are, and this was one of them. That's not it. I'm not getting anything here, guys. Help, somebody. There we go. This thing's blinking. I'm not sure this is right. We'll find out. Does that look like a fixer-upper? Isn't that what you think of? I'm like, I'm not sure I think it's a fixer-upper. I think it's a tear-downer. I don't know. That's a little too much for me. And the next one, I'm going to have a new clicker or something. It's like giving me a countdown or something there. Yeah. Did you guys think I just... Something that's counting down. Yeah. Did you think I just magically made that happen? Let's look at the next one. So this is a fixer-upper. Some of you are like, man, I'd like to live in that. But what we're looking at is just the outside, right? Instead of the inside. And sometimes our families look like that. Looks good on the outside, but it's failing on the inside. So how do we really live according to God's plan? We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7 over the next few minutes, and especially this verse where Jesus says this. He says, anyone who what? Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise. Man, when it comes to Scripture, if you only get this verse tonight, grab a hold of it. We're going to look at several other verses. But Jesus said, if you listen and you follow, you're wise. Like a person who builds a house on solid rock. When I think about our family, when I think about my family, I think about our church family, I want our family to be built on a solid rock. We know the storms are coming. We've just had some storms. Did y'all get it at your house? Man, I literally watched my neighbor's roof blow off. It's kind of cool. I hated it, but at the same time, I couldn't turn away, you know? Come on, you guys are sick like that too, right? If a train wreck's happening, you got to watch. We had some damage. We had some damage here at the church. But Jesus says the storms are going to come. We know that. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, there's nothing about Christianity that says there's not going to be storms in life. They're going to come. Thank you, Jason. You're awesome. Everybody give it up for Jason. Was it me or was it this? It is me. Let me ask you a question as we move forward. Who or what are you listening to and following in your home? Because Jesus said, anyone who listens and follows his teaching. That's why you'll notice around here live, we're helping you. We want to point you to Jesus. We're constantly leaning into looking at Jesus' teaching. Everything about the Old Testament is pointing to Jesus. When we use the words of Paul writes a lot of the New Testament after Jesus leaves this earth and goes back to the Father in heaven. Paul's only unpacking Jesus. In fact, everything about what he teaches is because there were problems in the church because we're human beings. And he says, well, we're not living like Jesus. So when I teach from the words of Paul, I always say, okay, here's where he got that with Jesus. When we teach with Jesus, we show you where Paul supports it. And we continue to do that. But you'll hear us. Our mission is leading people to Jesus. Why? Because Jesus said, if you listen to my teachings, and you'll follow them, your house will stand strong. Our house will stand strong. And we say we want that. When we say, I want it to be blessed. Now, Jesus in this message, he's giving one message here. It starts in chapter 5. And some of you will know what that is. Chapter 5 is known as the Beatitudes. But here's what he says back in chapter 5. And we're kind of looking at the end of one of his messages. He says this. Let's read it together. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. What does it mean to be righteous? It means to be in right standing with God, his plan, his purpose. And he says, you're blessed if you hunger and you thirst for this. My question is, what are we as families hungering and thirsting for? What does that look like in our lives? Now, as Jesus gets into chapter 7, it's toward the end of the message, he goes into this. He says, hey, there are two ways to live for eternal life. He says there's this wide gate, and he says many, many go there. And he says there's a very narrow gate, and only a few find it. He's talking about himself and the way to heaven. And right away, some of us go, why can't they just be everybody welcome? Everybody is welcome. But he says there's only one way, and it's through him. And I love in this verse because he actually says the gate to hell, to destruction is wide. And he says it's the highway to hell. And I can't help but hear the song. Every time I read it, you guys got it in your mind? Some of you are way too young. You're like, what are you talking about? Who or what are you listening to and following? Then Jesus says there's two types of trees. He says one tree, a good tree, produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. And he makes it really clear. Good tree produces good fruit. A bad tree cannot produce good fruit. As we talk about our lives and our families, we have to look at what we're rooted in. Is it Jesus? Or is it something else? Then he goes on, he says there's two kinds of followers. There's two kinds of followers here. Those who act like they obey, follow his command, and then those who really do the will of the Father. And to those who just act like it, he says, in the end, they're going to say to me, Lord, Lord. And he says, I don't even know you. It's about relationship, about following Jesus. See, I don't want my house to just look good on the outside. I want it to be real. I grew up in a family where my dad, he wanted everything to look good on the outside. I'd have friends that think, man, you guys, your family is like the perfect family. And they didn't understand the abuse and all the darkness behind the scenes. And some of our families are living like that. It's not how God wants you to live. Jesus goes on then, and he says there's two ways to build. On all of these, we got to see, we get to choose. He says there's two ways to build. On a solid rock or on sand. And when he uses that illustration, he talks about a wadi. It's like building your house in the middle of a wash here, a dry wash, and hoping it never floods again. He says, who would do that? Jesus tells us. He told us in Matthew 7:24, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise. So how do we do this? How do we fix our families? How do we get our families in line with what God has for us and walk in his blessing? I want that. I want that in my relationship with Kathy, my wife, with my kids. My mom is still alive, with my extended family, my siblings. How do we live that? It's by listening to and following Jesus. Now, in our culture, we try to do a lot of things that just don't work. And I want to start there because Jesus says that very clearly, that if we build on sand, it's just not going to work. So what doesn't work? In Matthew 7, he goes on and he says, anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey, everybody say it with me, doesn't. I hear it, but I don't obey. And this happens a lot, right? Man, I'm going to change. I heard what God says. I see what he says in his word, and I'm in a service like this, and I'm going to change. I'm going to do this. But then something happens Monday, and I'm like, nothing changes. I don't obey what he says. He says, it's foolish. There's two ways to build, a wise way and a foolish way. And he says, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come, and they will, y'all know that, right? And the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Put your family in this. When the winds come, the waves come, when the storm comes, if it's not built on Christ, if it's not built on Jesus and his teaching, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Some of you are going, well, this is good news? That's not the good news. The good news is we can build on a solid foundation that can withstand the storms. Two ways to build. One's wise, one's foolish. So what does that look like in our lives? What doesn't work? One of the things that doesn't work that we try a lot is rules and regulations, which is legalism. A lot of times that's where we start. Man, you got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do it, and we get very legalistic about it, and it doesn't work. Listen, if all you have is rules without relationship, it will lead to rebellion in your family, in your relationships. What's legalism? Man, I'm just going to keep the rules, check it off. And I know some of you are rule keepers. You're great at it. But it's more about the relationship. Remember, Jesus starts this teaching with, we're blessed when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, a right relationship with God the Father. Not with just keeping the rules, but with a right relationship with God the Father. Legalism, I don't know if you're living there right now or not, but let's be honest enough to say, is that where my relationship with God is? I just want to look good, and so I'm following the rules. Paul talks about this. Paul, who writes a lot of the New Testament after Jesus leaves this earth, he says, do you keep on following the rules of the world? Such as, he gets really clear here, don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. I mean, it gets real practical. It's like, well, I don't do this, I don't do that, I don't do that. And then he says this, these rules may seem wise, but they provide no help. Everybody say no help. There's still part of us that go, there's a little bit of help. No, he says they provide no help in conquering a person's evil desires. What does? A right relationship with God the Father. Let me illustrate this just from a family standpoint. This is one of my favorite pictures of our family. It's just a quick snapshot. One of my kids put the camera on a rock, and we took a photo. This sits by my bed, though, because I loved this time. We had all of our kids. My older kids were just a blast. I was having so much fun with my younger kids, so it's just one of our favorite times. So you can see here in this picture, we have teenagers. We also have young kids. And so we were dealing with this, trying to raise kids. Like, what are the rules? What should they be doing and not doing? And one of the things that's happening at this point when this picture is taken is my daughters the older daughters are going out with their friends. One of them, they're going on a date one night, first date. The guy comes up to me, sweaty hand, in my backyard, and he says, Mr. Love, I just meet him, they're going to this party, this dance, and he says, when am I supposed to have her home? And I said this. I said, I trust my daughter, and I'm trusting you to make a wise decision and that you'll be home at a wise time. And his eyes get so nervous. I got a phone call at 10 o'clock, like, we'll be home about 10:15, Here's what I'm telling you. You see, as parents, we tend to think, and in our families, we think, here's the rules. Be home at this time and this time and this time. And boy, they break the rules, there's penalties. Versus, Kathy and I started saying, we got to be careful with the legalism. We don't want rebellion. So our kids never had a time. And some of you are like, you're a horrible parent. Let me tell you what happened. My kids, we never had a time for them to be home. What we'd say is, we trust you to honor us. We trust you to make a decision to honor us when it comes to that time. And we got calls many times within, like 10, 11 o'clock. They'd say, hey, we feel like we're going to be a little late. We just want you to know. And we talk about honoring us means we're not going to have to worry about you. If we're worried about you and you think we're worried about you, you've crossed the line. Well, there were a few times we had conversations, but I'm telling you, it worked. My kids really cared about making sure and they knew why. We cared. We didn't want to be up worrying about them. You see, I'm not advocating that, by the way. You don't have to parent my style. I'm just saying we get so legalistic sometimes that we miss the relationship. By us setting the boundaries, saying, hey, this is about honoring our family, our relationships, knowing what you're out doing. And God says the same thing with us. So how are we going to get our families in this? Not in legalism, but in living in relationship with God and with one another. What doesn't work? Well, rules and regulations, legalism doesn't work. Second, spiritual indifference doesn't work. In other words, being lukewarm. Everybody say lukewarm. I'm just taking this straight from Jesus. I'm going to just tell you what he said. Some of us, we're not going to like this, but Jesus said this. He said, I know all things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. How many of you are coffee drinkers? Hot coffee? Iced coffee? Lukewarm coffee? What is that, huh? Sometimes we think, well, is Jesus saying hot is the good thing or cold's the bad thing? No, what he's saying here is we don't like the lukewarm. It's one way or the other. All in, or man, just make your decision. Here he says, I wish you're neither hot or cold. I wish that you were one or the other. But since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Man, you think you're getting some hot coffee and it's lukewarm. It just comes out. Jesus uses a word here. The New Testament's written primarily in Greek, and the word he uses is emeto. And he says this is what it really describes here. He says, I will spew you out of my mouth with disgust. Just like you would lukewarm coffee. Like, oh, I thought this was going to be cold, it's not, or I thought it was going to be hot, it's not. It's like, oh, that's horrible. It just doesn't taste good. I don't think coffee tastes good overall, but it really tastes bad lukewarm, right? I've learned to start drinking it about maybe 6-8 months ago. I told my wife someday I'm going to start drinking this. She always wanted me to, so I started drinking it. And the secret is the French vanilla. Half and half. That's what half and half really means. Half French vanilla, half coffee. And kind of doesn't matter whether it's lukewarm or not when you have enough French vanilla, I'm telling you. Jesus said, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. It's disgusting. He's like, get in, get out. And sometimes we're living in lukewarm. Parents, listen to me, and we wonder, why are our kids not following Jesus? What does that look like in our life? You all know the marriage statistics. Everybody says like half of marriages end in divorce. It's really not quite half. 43% in America end in divorce right now. And second marriages, it just doesn't get any better. And some of you are like, well, I'm on my second or third marriage. I'm just telling you, that's why we've got to get built on Jesus. You can see 60% end in divorce, 73% end in divorce of the third marriages. And again, some of you are like, Jeff, where's the good news? Let me show you the good news. Here's the good news. For those, as followers of Jesus, we can see that we can make it less than 1% end in divorce. And here's how. Studies show if you do these three things, you have less than 1% chance. It's something like 1 out of every 1,106 end in divorce of those who attend church together weekly, of those who pray together daily, and those who read the Bible together daily. That's just too simple, isn't it? That's it, though. That's the stats. I went back and looked at this study again. This study's been out for years. They've redone it recently, and they come back and they go, yep, it's about right. It's about 1 out of every 1,100 end in divorce who do these three things. I want my family to be blessed. I do too. But there's a part of us that go, yeah, but I don't want to do those things. Honestly, right now, in church attendance, the average American who says they go to church, it's once a month. Lukewarm. You saying I'm lukewarm? I'm just saying, this is how the marriage, and why is marriage important? Because that's the foundation that God has built the family on. And if you don't think that, then you haven't experienced what it's like to be divorced. My folks got divorced when I was in my 20s. I was already married. I couldn't believe how it affected me. All of a sudden, I already had a baby. We already had a child, and it changed my life. I'm like, wow, I have nowhere to call home for the holidays. I had nowhere to take. It was like all of a sudden, I couldn't stand what happened in my own thinking. If you think it's not important, you don't see what it does to the little kids. And listen, some of you are going through that. I'm sorry you're going through it. I'm not trying to shame you. That's not what I'm doing. I'm really sorry you're going through it. It's hard. And for some, there are some reasons sometimes that it's just like, it's going to happen. But what if we said, we're going to make this work by doing what God says? Jesus said there's two ways to build, a wise way and a foolish way. He says, if you listen to my teaching and obey, listen and obey. Say it with me, listen and obey. I'm pretty good at listening. It's that obedient part, right? I got to change. Let God change me. Let him work through me. But I want to live in the blessed life. Now, some of you, you'd say there are homes that just need torn down. So this is a home that we actually lived in for 4.5 years. Now, I'll tell you real quickly the story. You don't want to hear the whole story, but when we moved to town, we were in debt, and we were so committed to get out of debt, we didn't know how to do it. But somebody in our church said, well, we have this house. You won't want to rent it, and I didn't want to. My wife was all in, but we'll rent it to you for $200 a month, but it's on Broadway and Cherry. It's a dump. We're not fixing it up. I mean, there literally were holes in the ceiling when it would rain to come through. This is the house. And for me, man, I fought it. I did not want to live there. Across the street is a 7-Eleven, and there was a Circle K on the other corner. People were shooting each other many times. We'd hear the gunshots, and my kids are right there. God taught me so many things from that, and we were able to get out of debt through all that. I'm so grateful. But for me, I'm looking at this house, I'm like, tear it down. And you can see now what the city's doing is they've made it a part of a special project where they're rebuilding them and moving them back. And I thought, isn't that like God? This is way beyond a fixer-upper. When we lived in it, it was. Now, I mean, that was 20-some years ago. And now the city's like, no, it's historic and of great worth. I'm like, are you kidding? I would have burned it down. But I got to thinking this week, I thought that's the way God looks at our lives. Some of you right now, even as I talk about the divorce and the pain, and you're like, it's just too late. And God says, no, it's not. I'm the restorer. I'm the one who restores. It's not like it just is a little thing. He says, no, I'm the one who restores. And he paid a tremendous price for us to walk in that restoration. That's the good news. How do I live in that? Jesus said, if you listen to my words and you obey my words. Listen and obey. So what does work? Let's get to the good news. This is it. Embracing the power of being a Christ-centered family. That's what works. Now notice, I didn't say a Christian family. We live in a day and culture where we say we are whatever I say I am, that's what I am. And that's just not true. There are a lot of people saying, we're a Christian family. It's just not true. Jesus said, what it means to be my follower, to be Christ-centered, is to listen and obey. Well, our family's built on Christian values. That's not Christ-centered necessarily. Christ-centered is listening and obeying. When was the last time you went to a movie and you turned to your kids and said, you know what? This is just so far off of Christ and his values. I know we paid for it, but we're leaving. Oh, Dad, we can't. Yeah. When was the last time we changed the channels? When was the last time we made decisions financially? We're saying, what's Jesus say about this? When was the last time I made a decision about how I'm going to treat my wife or how I raise my kids based on what does Jesus say? I'm the guy who loves you all. You know this, right? Being a Christ, embracing the power of being a Christ-centered family. Say that with me. Embracing the power of being a Christ-centered family. In Psalm 42, there's a verse. It says, as a deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, the living God. That at the center of our family is this hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's where Jesus' sermon starts on this, about the building. He ends with the building, and he starts with, hey, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they'll be blessed. I don't know about you guys, but if you ever want to go see wildlife, you need to go on a trip with me and my family. We always see wildlife. And I know I'm going to bring this up, and somebody go, that's not a deer, Jeff, that's a moose. You all know that a moose is a deer. No, okay, a moose is a deer, an elk is a deer is a deer, okay? They're just all different breeds. But we always see, and I just happened to snap this one of him, this moose drinking water. And if you go with us and you want to see wildlife, I'm passionate. My family's passionate about wildlife. But we always see them. You know why? Because we find where they drink. And we know when they drink. And it doesn't matter what we're doing. We're like, oh, it's time. Let's go. They're all going to be there. And we go find the tracks. They've been there. We know they're going to drink here. As the deer pants for the water, my soul thirsts for you. I wonder if the world, I wonder as parents, if our kids are looking at our lives, if they'd say, we see you, Mom and Dad, thirsting for God. We know what your decisions are going to be like because it says it in Scripture. We know that we're going to be a Christ-centered family. See, I want my family to be blessed. And the blessed life is building the way Jesus tells us to build. He says it's wise to listen and obey. To listen and obey. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. This is where this whole message starts with Jesus about building a house on solid rock. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. The storms are coming. They will come. We teach a lot on storms. And we taught on this verse. But the question is, are we really honoring God as a Christ-centered family? Whether you're single or whether and if you're dating someone, find that out. Missionary dating is very dangerous if you say, well, I'm going to date him and lead him to Jesus. It's pretty dangerous. What does your family see in you, Mom and Dad? What does that look like for you? I know you guys heard they announced we're doing this barbecue tomorrow night. And I'm going to be here to eat, but I'm not bringing it. But I am going to be teaching about 4 verses that I just pray over my life as a man. And I've put them in a prayer form. I'm going to hand that out to you guys. I actually have it laminated for the men when you get here because when it's laminated, God's in it. That's what I'm saying. But just a prayer, these 4 verses I've prayed over my life just from mentors who've poured into me over the years. That God would help me because if you're a dad, you want to be a dad, you're a husband, God's given you a very special influence. So how do we live it? And there's something in us. There's a warrior in us that says, yes, I want to lead my family this way. The storms will come. How are you going to lead them through this? So we just went on vacation a couple weeks ago, and we were supposed to go a few weeks up in the mountains in Colorado. Took one set of our kids, and our baby, James, went with us for the first week in our RV, 26-foot RV. You know, it's a little crowded, but you hope you're going to be outside. And we get to Cortez, Colorado, and we have a breakdown. And it's my truck. They can't fix it. The battery life, it's a whole long story. I'll tell you all sometime. But they give me a new battery, and it's like, okay, you have until the battery dies, and then you're done. So we were able to literally pull into our camping spot, and when I turned off the truck, that was it. I couldn't even turn it on to move. And we had some suspension problems. Well, then we all, okay, thank God we're here. I'll take it we'll get it into town somehow to get it fixed. And then what happens is the next couple days, I got COVID. And we're thinking, okay, we're all together in this little RV. The next day, somebody else got COVID. The next day, somebody else got COVID. The next day, all the way until little James got COVID. And so basically, those few days were all spent just taking care of one another. But I mean, what a great place to be stuck, right? The Colorado Rockies, it was 70 degrees outside. It's perfect. But I mean, this was like, oh, there's a part of me that wants to just gripe and complain about the vacation. And so we had gotten my truck into town. They were able to replace this one problem, but there's this other major problem for pulling the trailer. And they're like, we can wait. It'll be another week. We can get the part. And I'm like, no, I'm going to limp home with it. So we start out heading home. And about 2 miles, I mean, I've never been ready to be home from a vacation faster than that vacation. I mean, Kathy and I both were like, let's just go home, get this stuff fixed. And so we're on our way about 2 miles from after leaving the camp. The kids had come home the day before, and we're just a couple miles from camp, and man, I'm smelling something. And we get out, and there's this breakaway thing, if you have an RV, on your brakes, and it was on fire. And we couldn't get it so I had to cut it off and get in my truck. And it says, okay, you have no trailer brakes. I'm thinking, great, let's stop and see if we can replace that part. We did, back in the same place that we stopped to get fixed. And I replaced the part, and the same thing, it just burns up. And I'm like, okay, we're going to make it home with no trailer brakes. I'm like, I can't stand this. And the guy at the shop had told me, by the way, your truck needs to replace the rear brakes. I'm thinking, okay, we're just going to do this. We're just getting home. It took me so long to get home. Right now, we're still in the middle of all those repairs and everything. Now, here's the thing. My kids are watching this. Here's the story that I really want you to hear from this, because this is the story we celebrated, and none of us cared what all was going on. When we first broke down in Cortez, Colorado, by the way, there's something about Cortez. I've been broken down there again before I got married for a week, blew an engine and couldn't get out of there. I'm just saying I'm never going through Cortez. I'm not superstitious, but it's off my list. I will go around. On my way through, though, we could see what was going on. Kathy and I, okay, we're going to have to stop in Cortez. We stopped at this AutoZone. And this man named Cordell says, I can help you. He gave me the new battery. He says, you just bought a battery. We'll just give you a new one. And then he says, I think it's your alternator. He says, but there's no way you're going to get that fixed around here. He says, why don't you try replace it yourself? I'm like, I'll try. And he comes back out and he says, I think I'll help you. So for an hour and a half, he replaces my alternator. And I said, why did you do that? And you asked me if I was going to. He said, I just looking at you, I'm thinking there's no way this guy can get it. And he's right, During that hour and a half, it was so evident. And we pray daily. We're like, Lord, what are the appointments you have for us today? And it was like, it was for him. Even as our battery was going out and we know we're having a problem, we're like, okay, God, you got a plan. What would it be? I started sharing my faith with Cordell. We started talking. Somewhere in that conversation, after a half hour or so of just sharing my faith, he goes, you know what? This is God. He says, because just 2 weeks ago, I prayed and said, God, I want to get to know you, but I don't even know how to pray or what to talk to you about. I don't know why we did this, but we only had one Life Transformation Bible with us. We just were taking it for us. And I'm driving a truck. I should fill that baby up when I go, But we gave him our one Bible and said, Cordell, here's what you do. I walked him through the plan, and we've texted a few times since, and he's doing this. And he's like, this was God for me. And when we got to camp, the kids knew we were going to be late. They were meeting us there, and they know we were broken down. What's going on? We said, no, let's tell you this story. And my kids were like, that is so cool. That's what we're about. Honoring God as a Christ-centered family. I got to tell you, honestly, when I started finding out the problems, I'm like, oh, God, this is going to cost so much. And he says, is it my money? I go, oh, yeah. Is it my truck? I said, oh, yeah. And I really felt the Lord just saying, you know what? I can spend whatever I want to get Cordell into heaven. I go, you're right. You're right. And we still were working on some problems. And when we got home, we're like, okay, there must be more mechanics in Tucson that need Jesus. I've been in the shop already 3 times, and it's still not fixed. And every time I'm getting to know these guys, I'm like, man, they're on my list. Rick's on my list, man. I told him, I said, I'm going to get to know you. And he says, I hope you don't break down that much. And now I'm going back in. I said, well, told you we're going to get to know each other, Rick. Am I going to do this? Am I going to listen and obey? Am I going to make it about me? I mean, I told Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I want to be a living sacrifice. It's okay. And I'm telling you, my family's so blessed. That wasn't our favorite vacation. That's not what I'm saying. I'm so blessed, though, to come home with kids who, they spent their whole vacation with a sick family in a 26-foot trailer, and they're like, we're so excited about this guy following Jesus, and God's using this, and he appointed that. Am I going to do this? Man, I fail miserably at times. I'm telling you, I need this. I need this teaching so I can say, God, how do I live my life listening and obeying? That we're Christ-centered. Not that we're just a Christian family by name, but that Kathy and I now, as our kids have grown, and now we have grandkids, and we're saying, how can they see us as Christ-centered? What does that look like? I don't want people to say, oh, yeah, he's that Christian guy. No, I want them to know, I'm a follower of Jesus. That's how I want to live. In Joshua chapter 24, there's a verse, and this is one of those I'm going to use tomorrow with the men. One of my prayers. Choose today whom you will serve. As for me and my family, we'll serve the Lord. Men, if I could just challenge you to rise up as warriors, that warrior spirit in you, and just say this as the next step. As for me and my family, I can't force my kids to follow Jesus, but I want them to see that in my life. No matter what's going on, no matter how many truck breakdowns we have or things go out in the RV, that they can say, that's what it's all about for Dad. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord by being a Christ-centered family. There's some tough decisions in all that. But in all of that, there's the blessed life that I can't even explain to you. My family has so many blessings that make no sense. But Jesus said this. He said, you're blessed. Blessed when you pursue righteousness. And he said, this is how you do it. You build life this way. Build on my words by listening and obeying. I want to just encourage you to embrace the power of being a Christ-centered family today. It starts right here. It's a choice. Everything about the end of Jesus' message here, it's called the Sermon on the Mount. When we get to chapter 7, he says, here's the choices you get to make. We get to choose. And God works through us. Let's make that decision today. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord by being a Christ-centered family. Father, thanks so much, Jesus, that you showed us the way. Lord, you didn't leave us out here on our own. The storms are coming regardless. Life is happening. But we can live a blessed life. To know that no matter what's going on, we are safe in your arms. We have eternal life. Lord, everybody here, everybody listening to my voice said, yeah, I want my family to be blessed. We want that. I want that. Would you speak to our hearts, Lord? If you're not a follower of Jesus, would you just make this your prayer? Because this is where it starts. Just say, Lord, I want to invite you into my life. Forgive me of my sin. Purify my heart. I'm choosing to pursue righteousness. Would you help me do that? Would you help all of us, Lord, to listen and obey so that our families would live that blessed life?